This RealAg Radio podcast episode is brought to you by Coragen Max Insecticide from FMC. Get fast, selective, extended control of grasshoppers, Bertha armyworms, diamondback moth, and cutworms in a convenient, concentrated formulation. Coragen Max Insecticide works alongside beneficials for a 1-2 punch that keeps the fight going long after you've left the field.
It's time for RealAg Radio on Rural Radio Channel 147 on Sirius XM. RealAg Radio and RealAgriculture.com is your home for insight and analysis of the issues that are impacting your farm business. Let's get real and get connected with RealAg Radio.
Yes, hello and welcome to RealAg Radio. It is time for Agronomic Monday here on April 14th. I am your host, Lyndsey Smith, right here on Rural Radio Channel 147, Sirius XM. I am so excited for the week ahead because it finally feels like we've got spring arriving. We had our third winter. We had at least 2 full springs, or so it felt like, and we are just grinding away to warmer weather. It's probably better where you are, but I don't know about you. The Eastern Ontario, Ottawa Valley vibe has been cold and snowy, and just the sun has some warmth, but the daytime temps have just been kind of lame, and we're waiting for green grass. So, the week ahead, though, looks pretty good. I'm pretty excited about it. And one of the things we're also doing this week is the entire RealAg team is getting together for the beginning of this week. So if we're a little quieter on social media, have no fear. We're just getting together, brainstorming, thinking about all sorts of cool things we're going to do in the year ahead. And of course, with that, this radio show is a huge part of that. All of our podcast series, our YouTube channel, all of that. And we'd love to get your feedback. You can leave us a message at 1-855-776-6147. You can zip me an email, lsmith@realagriculture.com, or you can do like so many of you do and send us a DM across social media, whether it's Instagram, Facebook, X, TikTok, you name it. We're there. You can drop us a comment or send us a message. On today's show, we're going to talk about choosing the right inoculant formulation for pulse crops. And we've also got Peter Wheat Johnson, and he's going to join me, and we have a laundry list of things to go through. We've got questions about ROI on fertilizer decisions, some N stabilizer discussions, and some damage you can do walking on very frosty wheat. And we'll talk erosion too, because that's always a big one. Let's take a break. I'll be back with Peter Wheat Johnson right after this.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio, Koch Agronomic Services, and we've got Bryce Geisel, who's the senior agronomist out of Saskatchewan. Now, when it comes to these low-rate protection products, how do growers actually know what to believe?
When we go back to the inhibitors, the question they need to ask is what inhibitor is in the product, how much active ingredient amount is getting used, and where is the research to support those rates? Now, Koch Agronomic Services products have been and are currently being used extensively and tested across the country. Researchers use them as a standard because they work consistently and can be compared against. And we even use these same standards internally when we're kind of bringing new technology to the market. So if we think of Anvil or Cinchero, so we're always kind of going back to what we know historically has worked, and the research is supporting that it does work. If you want to find out more, you can go to defendyourn.ca, and that's where you can really find all the information between some of these different products and some of the rates, and you can look at some comparisons. All that information is found there at defendyourn.ca.
Growing corn? With Envita, you can cut your nitrogen and maintain yield, or maintain nitrogen and increase yield. Envita takes nitrogen from the air and turns it into nitrogen for your corn. It provides a right place, right time source of nitrogen to maximize your yield. Farmers who use Envita see healthier plants, bigger cobs, and less tipback. Envita is guaranteed to add more bushels to every treated acre. Start growing with Envita. Visit azotic.com to learn more. That's azotic.com.
Welcome back to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio Channel 147, Sirius XM. It is Agronomic Monday. I am your host, Lyndsey Smith, and this segment is brought to you by Lemkin, Solitaire, and Equalizer Seeders and Planters, offering disruptive innovation like vertical banding, dry and or liquid onboard fertilizer, and great prices. Go to lemkindemo.com for more information, and yes, to request a demo. All right, joining me now, it is Peter Wheat Pete Johnson. Peter, how are you?
I am awesome. Thanks, Lyndsey. It was an excellent weekend. It was the sun shone. Pete was too busy to get any real work done out in the field or in the yard or whatever, which is bad because he has a lot to do. But anyway, it was a great weekend. They just had a ton of fun. And so life is good.
Mm-hmm. Here too, here in the Shady Creek household, we got a new puppy. We have a future herding dog on our hands. And she's a gem, and she only woke me up at 5 a.m. She did not keep me up all night, so I am thankful. And of course, Charlie, my youngest, has been carrying her around as if she's a baby, and she's not. So I've asked her to please put her on the ground so she doesn't pee in my house. Anyway, so that's it. That's the excitement here, and it finally, maybe, just maybe, is warming up a little bit, Pete. And thank goodness, because I feel like it is the spring that will never come, but this is probably average. What does Nature Nut Nick say so far?
Actually, I think we are behind average. And I think what Mother Nature is doing, Lyndsey, because this is the way it works. Last winter, we had no winter. I'm talking about the winter of 24. This winter we had a real winter, and so it's kind of Mother Nature is averaging last winter out with this winter, and I'm actually I'm not a pessimist. I think people know that, but it does concern me because you look at the Environment Canada forecast, and it is for an abnormally hot June, July, August. And you think about my wonderful wheat crop, well, it's behind where we would normally expect it to be. Not a lot behind, but, if we push 4 or 5 days later so that the grain fill period is 4 or 5 days later than it would normally be, and that pushes those 4 or 5 days into a hot spell, that does not bode well for the yield on the wheat crop. The more days we can get in grain fill, the better. The cooler it is through grain fill, the better. And again, it's not that I'm trying to be pessimistic, but I just wish. Last year, we were early. We had awesome wheat yields. We almost set a record. And it was because we had a nice, cool grain fill period. So Pete likes it when the wheat crop is early because that gives a higher probability of excellent yields.
Well, it seems we're both going to be disappointed then, potentially. Although I will tell you this, Pete, June's a long way off. And it feels a long way off, given what the weather is like. So we'll see.
Yeah, June is not a long way off, but a lot can happen between now and then, okay? So, again, I'm not trying to be pessimistic. I would rather the wheat crop was advanced and not delayed.
Right. Okay. I'll put my order in. We'll see what we can get done. We have a very long list to get through today. So we're going to try our best to get through most of it. And one of the key things that has been making the rounds on social media, a conversation that continues, and I'm glad that it does, because Pete, we often talk about, keeping our soils covered, keeping roots in the soil, and yes, it's to keep nutrients where we want, but ultimately it's also about keeping our soil where we want, which is on our fields and not moving. Some great social, if anybody saw the reels across the Real Agriculture feeds this week, Pete went out and was finding some erosion differences. So walk us through. What are we seeing out there?
So I was on near Varna, and it just happens to be there. It must be on top of a moraine or something like that, because the field I was in has incredible hills, and the grower has tried very hard to manage the water. They had berms built, so that's to hold back the water, and they had Hickenbottoms, so that's to take the water underground so that it doesn't cause erosion, down from the berm or get that concentrated flow. But they've always struggled with erosion, and I work with these growers quite closely, and a few years back they did their absolute best to get the field leveled out. And once they got it level, they said, okay, we don't want to till it again, because every time we till it, the erosion is horrendous. So we're going to do everything we can to stop the erosion, and we're going to do the least tillage possible. So it was wheat last fall, and I don't know if the people that saw that reel, I'm not sure the pictures do it justice, but I tried to show, the panoramic view, and I was standing at basically the bottom of a massive bowl, and those hills were at least 40 feet in elevation. That I know this, Lyndsey, because I walk up them, and they are steep, and just 3 inches of rain within an hour and a half or like overnight, but a very short period of time. There was signs of erosion all over the place. The wheat stubble, they grew a cover crop of oats. They didn't burn the oats off until as late as possible last fall. I think it was in November or late October, and they did not touch that soil. It's an absolute blanket. It's a mat of residue on most of that area. Man, there was zero erosion, even with 3 inches of rainfall in a very concentrated time right at the end of winter when the soils are saturated. We're not getting water into the soil at that point because it's already saturated. And there was zero erosion till it hit the berm, but there was enough volume of water traveling over the surface that it hit the berm, and they were repairing the berm. They had some extra soil there that they hadn't got in place yet. And so it was about, 6 feet of soil. The water where that loose soil was to repair the berm, and the berm itself was such a concentrated flow that it blew right through that. It was 6 foot of gully. But then amazingly, on the downhill side of the berm, once that water got back up on top of the residue, there was enough of a mat of residue there that there was zero erosion. I couldn't believe it. I was positive we'd have a gully. There was zero erosion. So hats off to those growers. They are doing an awesome job. Now, there is one caveat, Lyndsey, and we stopped the erosion, but we also have this blanket of residue on the soil surface. Mm-hmm. And so the trick is to get that field dry enough. They're going to soybeans. They don't grow corn. Those hills are just too erosion prone and such heavy clay that corn doesn't do as well. So they're going to soybeans, but we need to get that soil dried out without making a mess of it so that it's not level. And that'll be the next challenge. But from an erosion perspective, wow.
Mm-hmm. Now, this, of course, ties in, and I know you couldn't join us last week for our episode of The Agronomist that talked about killing covers, but this was one of the questions that came up, was about termination timing. And I know that, if you've got the off-calf funding, whatever, they want the cover to live into the fall, which I know is a challenge. And we've talked about this before, but they want enough sort of plant material there going into the fall for reasons. That's what they want. But one of the growers that was on the call, similar question, except for that they didn't terminate in the fall. They wanted the oats to die over the winter. They didn't, as well as they had hoped. And now they've got not a mat of residue, but a mat of green residue. And they're a little worried. It's a heavy clay and they're worried. So what would you do in that situation?
So they need to terminate those oats as early as they can, because the longer and the problem is it's a heavy clay soil. Now, the beauty of the oat crop is that it dies really easily. So you can push the temperature restrictions we would normally push. And because oats are so susceptible to glyphosate, even if it goes below -3 at night, you probably still get control, but it still has to be fit to drive across the field.
That's right.
And therein lies the challenge. Mm-hmm. Once you get that done, and it would depend, Lyndsey, on what crop they're going to. In this particular situation where we did terminate last fall, and by the way, I would suggest that this is a great example of why realistically off-calf shouldn't necessarily make growers kill the crop or leave the crop alive rather over the winter, because it does cause problems. Mm-hmm. And with enough residue there, we didn't get erosion, and that's really what we're trying to prevent. Regardless, I don't set those parameters; they just frustrate me from time to time. Mm-hmm. But this spring, we will be running over the field in question, the field that I was on, with a straight coulter, right? Some kind like a Salford RTS or a Great Plains Turbo Max with zero angle on it, so that all we're doing is kind of trying to stir that residue up a little bit and get it to dry. And so once the grower that has the live oat residue there, I think he has to get it killed, and then you do what you need to do, but as little as possible to get the crop in the ground. And again, if it's corn, you could look at strip till. There's options, but on heavy clay soil, if it's wet in the spring, she's a tough go. As McBlain's would say at Onondaga, it's patience, patience, patience. And that is a very hard thing to exercise.
Mm-hmm. And so we are going to take a break, and we'll come back to this conversation of patience, because certainly if things seem delayed, sometimes we all of a sudden find ourselves in a time crunch. But I wanted to, before we go to a break, I did want to just touch on the water erosion part. I think one of the things that, and maybe everyone's annoyed that I mentioned this, but there's a water droplet component to water erosion that I don't like, the raindrop velocity component that I don't think it's talked about enough. And exactly your point, Pete, by killing a cover crop just ahead of freeze up, that plant material is still there. It's still going to intercept those raindrops and slow that velocity of that raindrop down, because that, when it hits bare soil, it explodes that soil particle. So, like, to me, yes, I understand that, we need parameters for some of these things, but frankly, just residue in general and not having bare soil really does offer protection in the spring.
Yeah, 100%. And I mean, it depends on how much residue you have. If you, like a soybean crop doesn't really give you enough residue, even though if you don't till it still isn't going to intercept everything. But if you have a good cover crop there, I'm in your camp, Lyndsey, it can be dead residue and it still does what it needs to do. And actually, I wouldn't be opposed to letting it live into the spring if it didn't cause the potential problems it does in the spring, but it complicates it. It increases the risk of not having the best crop the following year, which makes growers less likely to use the cover crop. And I think that's not where we want to go.
That's right. First, do no harm to the crop you want to put in the ground, right? There you go. Okay. Yes, let's take a quick break. We'll be back with more RealAg Radio here on this Agronomic Monday with Peter Repeat Johnson right after this. It is time for today's Product Spotlight. Joining me now is Jason Mann. Genesis Fertilizers announced a new partnership with the Arctic Gateway Group. Tell us about this partnership.
Arctic Gateway Group is owned by quite a number of Indigenous communities in northern Manitoba. They're owners of the Port of Churchill and the Hudson Bay Railroad. Why it's important to us, everybody thinks Genesis Fertilizers is about nitrogen plant. We want to build nitrogen production in Western Canada for Western Canadian farmers. But when you're using nitrogen, you also need phosphate. And the idea of working with the Arctic Gateway Group is to find a solution to bring phosphate into Western Canada. We don't produce any phosphate in Canada, so we're very dependent on imports. And most of those imports come from USA and North Africa. Now, we thought it would be prudent to look for a source of phosphate. We'll call it tariff-free, where we don't have to worry about the risk of tariffs. If we can source phosphate somewhere globally and then bring it in a Panamax vessel into Churchill into Western Canada is a very efficient route. It's the closest tidewater to prairie farmers.
For anyone who's looking for more information, head on over to the Genesis Fertilizers website.
Get all the information you need to keep your pulse crop healthy and profitable with the Pulse School on RealAgriculture.com. The Pulse School is a free YouTube video series covering agronomy, research, and more across a host of different pulse crops. It's also available as an audio podcast wherever you download or stream your favorite podcast. Check us out on YouTube or visit RealAgriculture.com. The Pulse School, brought to you by BASF Canada.
Welcome back to Real Ag Radio here on Rural Radio, Channel 147, Sirius XM. I am your host for the day, Lyndsey Smith, and don't put your yield at risk. Put your trust in proven solutions. Anvol Nitrogen Stabilizer, Super U Premium Fertilizer, and Tribune Nitrogen Stabilizer from Koch Agronomic Services. These products offer high active ingredient concentrations imitator brands just can't match. See the difference at defendyourn.ca. All right, we're here with Peter Repeat Johnson. Now, Pete, you mentioned patience at time in the spring. Certainly a difficult one. There's certainly been some talk about the damage we can potentially do on, let's say, a crop early in the year if we head out too soon. You're hearing about, maybe some questions about driving on a frosted crop. What do we need to know? What damage could we be doing?
And so it's just such a tremendous question, Lyndsey, or thought process. And I'm really thankful to Dr. Dave Hooker from Ridgetown Campus, University of Guelph, because I forget how the Twitter thread started, but Dave jumped in and then actually got Sarah Stricker involved from the Turfgrass Institute at Guelph, because if you're a golfer, you know that some mornings they have a frost delay. And so what's really interesting to me is that in this Twitter discussion, one of the people that jumped in said, well, I think it's just a compaction issue. It's, your big loads and you're driving over and on top of the frozen ground. Man, Sarah actually tweeted out a picture where two people had walked across a frozen golf green, and you could see every footprint. It was the grass was burnt to the ground from the frost damage, and if the people walking on it are enough to cause compaction issue, then we have big problems. And by the way, we've also seen it with when we spread clover on frost. Mm-hmm. And in bad situations, in severe situations, it can lead to some yield loss, but most of the time that doesn't happen. The trick is to understand why it happens and then understand, do we take that risk or do we not drive on it when it's frozen? And so one of the things that Dr. Dave pointed out is that when the white frost develops on the wheat itself, that's often when we see the most injury. And my question was why is that? What is that an indication of? Because that's frozen water on the outside of the leaf. Mm-hmm. And so Dave said, well, if you think about that, it's that frost develops from radiative cooling from the leaf surface. If we get ice formation on the leaf surface because it's lost that much heat to be able to generate those ice crystals, pretty good chance that there are also ice crystals on the inside of the leaf. And if there are ice crystals that have formed on the inside of the leaf and we drive on it, or even if it's bad enough we walk on it, those ice crystals just basically decimate the cell. Mm-hmm. Because that pressure and the ice crystals doesn't give, and it's almost like diatomaceous earth in the gut of an insect, where it just scratches it all up and the insect dies. Well, these ice crystals get compressed into the cells explode, and they are dead. And so that really helps with the thought process, and also the fact that we always see the most injury when it's very cold. Mm-hmm. So if it's not below -8, sometimes -10, we don't tend to see much injury unless we see the white frost. And I think the white frost says, well, air temperature might be -6, but guess what? The temperature in that leaf probably is a lot colder than that, just because of that radiative cooling that has happened. So temperature matters. The colder it is, the more likely you're going to have ice crystal formation. White frost matters, and the white frost is the visual indicator that there's likely something inside the plant now that's going to cause you a problem. And if you put those two together, you can start to make a much, much better decision on, do I drive across it or do I not drive across it? And I mean, Steve Sickle tweeted out a picture where he spread manure on a very cold, frosty morning, and every wheel track from the manure spreader. Even though he has central tire inflation system on the spreader, he was only running, I think he said, 12 or 14 pounds pressure in the tires. So you'd say, gosh, that shouldn't cause a problem. Well, guess what? If you have those ice crystals, even if you walk on the stupid crop, you're going to get that problem. Mm-hmm. And then the next question becomes, do we get permanent damage? Do we actually cause some damage? Because the growing point is that 3/4 of an inch in the ground. Most of the time, I think the answer is no. But if it's very severe, then maybe the damage to the above ground part that should be photosynthesizing and helping that new growth to come, maybe the lack of photosynthate from the damaged tissue does reduce how many tillers those plants can hang on to, and that might be part of the problem.
Okay. Also, here's a trivia geeky moment for you. When you add water to ice or ice to water, the water warms up the ice doesn't cool your drink. That's the way it works.
Cool.
There you go. Okay. Someone will probably call in and be like, no, that's not true. No, it is true. Okay. Anyway, more like way smarter people than me told me these things. Now, that does bring up, though, Pete, you mentioned the potential damage to a leaf. Maybe the plant can't take in as much photosynthesis or create as much energy. We hear this time of year sometimes about purple wheat. We've been hearing about snow mold. What do we need to know about any funky colors or perhaps this wheat crop coming back from something like snow mold?
So we are starting to get into the purple wheat dilemma. And I was out scouting I think I was in a canola field actually, and I got a call from a grower who said, all right, I've already put, on 2/3 of my acres, I have my first sulfur plus a little tad of nitrogen. I think he said 40 pounds of nitrogen, something like that. On 2/3 of my wheat, I'm just driving down the road, going to go into the next, keep doing the other third. Boy, this wheat has turned purple. It wasn't purple a few days ago. As I pull into the field, it just like, do I still put it on? What is it okay? And so the beauty of that is that it's just anthocyanin, and we've seen it so many times. But realistically, it's cold soil, and as you said, right out the gate, Lindsey, we are getting a bit of heat now, but not a lot, and it's cold overnight, so our soils are cold. The above ground part of the plant, guess what? It's been getting some sunshine, it's photosynthesizing, it's got nowhere to go to that photosynthate, so we get purple. Put the nitrogen on, put the sulfur on, it's going to come back. It's just a transient thing, and it's because we're not growing roots in the soil. There's no place for that photosynthate to go. And the plant makes the anthocyanin as a defense mechanism, because if too much photosynthate builds up in the plant, then it's actually toxic to the plant. And that's the plant's defense mechanism. It turns it into anthocyanin, which is purple.
Mm-hmm. Plants are amazing, everybody. Yeah, that's all you need to know. Okay. What about snow mold? Have we had fields that are just decimated by it? Is everything recovering? What's the latest?
So we absolutely have had triticale fields, cereal rye fields that are annihilated by snow mold. We have snow mold in some winter barley at levels that higher than I'd like. And in winter wheat, and part of the reason that the winter wheat isn't as affected as the winter barley is because we plant winter barley before we plant winter wheat. The winter barley gets bigger, and therefore when it's bigger, it's more susceptible to the snow mold. With the triticale and the rye, oftentimes we're going after forage with them, so we put some nitrogen or some manure on them in the fall, and that again gives me more growth, and more growth means more snow mold. So yes, there are some fields decimated. In wheat, I haven't seen many fields decimated. I've seen little areas of fields that are hurt very badly. What really worries me, Lindsey, about the snow mold in the winter wheat is it's odd patterns this year. I'll get 4 feet of good wheat and I'll get 6 inches of snow mold. And it's like that was a little microclimate where the snow didn't melt quite as quickly when we first got it, and then it just kept staying there longer and longer. And so those little pockets, they're alive, but I really worry, have I reduced my potential yield there? Again, no green tissue. It's all been taken off by the snow mold. And so those plants aren't turning purple because they can't photosynthesize. And if they can't photosynthesize and the plant has to take its reserves to start that new green growth, will I lose tillers? If I lose tillers, we know less heads per square foot, less yield. And so it's not a disaster by any stretch, but you just kind of go, oof. It's much more evident than I would like.
And the best thing to do is go in with a spring wheat and just fill in those holes and make it all feed. Right, Pete?
Well,
I'm just kidding, but this is what I like to do. I like to throw these things at you, but it is a question that we do get is, let's say most of the field makes it, but some of the field doesn't. What's the plan of attack?
So in the snow mold situation, like if you know it, if you're on heavy clay and it's water damaging and you know that's dead, then you're right, Lyndsey. Fill them in with spring wheat. Where the winter wheat is, it'll outcompete the spring wheat. You'll never even see a seed at it there. You're out the cost of the drill and the seed. Where there's not enough winter wheat, the spring wheat will come, and then you can actually combine those areas separately after because they'll be mature later anyway, right. And that goes to feed, and the good areas still go as milling quality wheat. The challenge with the snow mold is how many of those plants are dead, how many of those plants are actually alive, and in most cases this year, there's almost no big areas in wheat fields that I have enough damage to say I would go in and reseed with spring wheat. Like I still think there's enough plants that will make it.
Okay. There you go, everybody. There should be. But if you are going to fill in those gaps, let us know because I'm always interested to know how people manage patchy wheat. Okay, let's take a quick break and we'll be back with more RealAg Radio right after this.
Every farmer defines success differently, and every farm has its own unique challenges. Corteva Biologicals is partnering with Canadian farmers for their success, offering unique solutions that improve and protect crops from start to finish, based on each field's needs. Using proven predictable solutions across all crop stages, Corteva Biologicals helps build healthy, productive, and profitable farms. Corteva Biologicals, we're growing together.
Right now, people in agriculture and food are facing challenges that can feel overwhelming. If you need to talk, access the National Farm Crisis Line at 1-866-FARMS-01. That's 1-866-327-6701. It's 24/7 confidential help when you need it. Farm Credit Canada also has tools to support your long-term mental health. Learn more and access the crisis line at fcc.ca/wellness.
Welcome back to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio, Channel 147, Sirius XM. In response to client requests, CCIA now offers a privacy consent option that lets us share your contact info to help recover lost, stray, or found livestock, all while keeping other details private. Learn more at support.canadaid.ca. All right, we head now to our latest Pulse School episode with Amber Bell and Anique Josuttes talking about making the right call on inoculants.
I'm Amber Bell, and this is Real Agriculture. I am here today for an episode of Pulse School with Anique Josuttes of BASF. So welcome, it's great to see you.
Great to see you as well.
So tell me a little bit about what you do with BASF. Let's start off with that.
Yeah, so I'm a technical marketing specialist for seed treatments and inoculants. I'm based out of Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, so working directly with our tech service specialists as well as our marketing team in that given portfolio.
Okay, and we're going to be talking about which inoculant is the right one. Down to the basics, what are some of the things that you want growers to know going in choosing their inoculant for this year?
Yeah, when I think about the inoculant space in general, it's really saturated, right? There's tons of different options at a variety of different price points, and depending which retail you go to, it's going to be a total different conversation. So I think when we think about inoculants, there's three big hitters that we need to touch on. Which formulation is right for your farm, right? Is it a peat formulation, a liquid formulation, a solid core granular formulation? And we can get into that a little bit, but which formulation is right for your farm? what rhizobium strain is in that inoculant, as well as what else is included with that rhizobium strain. So is there a biological that's in there that's, providing something else besides what the rhizobium is providing in terms of nodulation? So those are the three big hitters that I think about and we think about at BASF when you're going into that retail to have that conversation around inoculants.
And what factors would come into play making those choices?
So when we think about formulation specifically, because that's a big one, price is going to come into play when we think about which formulation. But the big one really is which type of equipment that grower has on their farm. So are you set up with multiple tanks to have a solid core granular formulation, or do you need to think about having a liquid or seed applied peat formulation that's going to work a little bit differently, but allow you to get that seed in the ground inoculated?
Okay, and when you talk about the biologicals or the rhizobium that's in the formulation, what are some of the factors that might impact that? Like, would growing conditions the previous year?
Yeah, no, so when we think about the rhizobium piece of that, really what it's about is it specific to the crop you're growing? So we hear a lot of different noise in this space around crop generalist versus crop specific. So crop specific, when we think about pulses, is going to work directly on pea and lentils. So I always think about it in like, sort of like you go into the doctors and they're like, you're low on vitamin D. Are you going to go to Costco and, get a multivitamin for $30 that has a bunch of different vitamins or nutrients in it that you don't really need? Or are you going to go and get that vitamin D specific from Costco that's going to directly target what you're lacking? And so that's the kind of the difference between crop specific versus crop generalist.
Right. And would you guys typically do a soil sample or something then, or go off of a soil sample for it?
Yeah, growers can utilize soil samples. I think across the board in Western Canada, when we think about pulses and setting up for success in that early season timeframe, most guys are going to inoculate, and it's going to depend then if there's a biological, a price conversation, and again, that formulation piece as to how much they're wanting to spend on that inoculant.
So there have been a lot of talk about biologicals recently.
Yeah.
What can be included into an inoculant, and how much of a difference does that make?
Yeah, so when we think about inoculants and biologicals, they can go hand in hand, and they do different things. So inoculants specifically work with that rhizobium relationship and creating that inoculation. With a biological, depending on what that biological is, it can bring a couple different things. So there are situations where there can be suppression of early season diseases, but there's also situations where it's providing kind of like a glove around that root system. So protection against those early season stresses, especially, I'm based in Saskatchewan. It can be really cold in that early season. So protecting that little seedling during that critical time frame, as well as more effectively using the nutrients. So whether it be water or those micronutrients, biologicals can assist in that as well.
Great. So automatically when you're choosing an inoculant, are there going to be biologicals included?
No, that is something that needs to be a conversation for sure. And think about, as a grower, what you're looking for. Not all inoculants are going to provide that biological. And with that being provided, I think there also needs to be a conversation on what is supporting those claims. So with both inoculants and biologicals, it's a little bit different than a herbicide or a fungicide, where PMRA is regulating the efficacy data that is provided to get those claims on label. With inoculants or biologicals, it's the CFIA. So efficacy data isn't actually required in those situations. And so those claims can kind of range in terms of how true or false they really are. So having an opportunity to see it in the field, talk to reps, and get some supporting data is something that we really do advise as well.
That's great. And what would you recommend to growers that are looking to choose their inoculant? Like right now, they're going out. What would be their first steps?
I would first look at your equipment. So which formulation is going to work for you? Which rhizobium you're wanting. So directly targeting, are you looking at a logistic benefit, or are you looking at getting the most out of your inoculant and having a crop specific rhizobium strain? And then if you're looking to have that biological added, and really what that biological is going to be doing for you.
All right. Well, thank you to Amber and to Anique for that report. A reminder, if you want to check out more Pulse School episodes, head on over to our YouTube channel. You can subscribe there, and you can find all our past episodes there as well. All right. We're going to take a quick break, and I'll be back with more RealAg Radio right after this.
If you grow soy or edible beans in Ontario, you know that Sclerotinia white mold is no joke. Yield loss can be devastating, and timing fungicides can be complicated, but did you know there's a new seed treatment that can help mitigate yield loss? Start the year off with your best foot forward against disease. Ask your seed supplier or local Agrimart group to pre-treat your beans with Heads Up. Part of a complete white mold management plan, ask your seed dealer about Heads Up today or visit headsupst.com.
The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com is your one-stop shop for everything a canola grower needs. Check out our free video series on YouTube for all the latest in canola agronomy, research, marketing, and more. Don't have time to watch? Download the podcast version of the Canola School on RealAgriculture.com or anywhere you download your podcasts. Stay on top of all things canola with the Canola School on RealAgriculture.com, brought to you by BASF and Invigor Hybrid Canola.
Welcome back to Real Ag Radio here on Rural Radio, Channel 147, Sirius XM. It is Agronomic Monday. I am your host, Lyndsey Smith, and with volatile markets and rising costs, now's your chance to be part of the solution. It's time to secure your future with Genesis Fertilizers. Gain control and ensure access to locally produced nitrogen. Act now to protect your farm's future for generations. Visit genesisfertilizers.com to learn more. Joining me, of course, is Peter Wheat Johnson, resident agronomist here, and also, of course, thespian and one who has been encouraging all of us, Pete, and I really do appreciate this, to every week on The Word, or just about every week, you remind us about how important human connection is, and I appreciate this over and over. The Wheat Pete 15 to reach out. If you think of somebody, give them a call. Don't call me, just text me and then call me. But these are important things. And we have talked about on this show and of course on The Word as well about the I Am Enough, event that happened this weekend that kicked off that tour. How did it go and how important is the Wheat Pete 15?
So the Wheat Pete 15, Lyndsey, and I don't care what you call it, but reaching out just to say to someone that you haven't talked to for a while, or maybe you talked to them last week, but you just call them up and say, how are you? Really, how are you? And care. And I think we all do care. But man, if you call somebody up and you just say in that question, you are telling them, I care about you, man, even thinking about it, Lyndsey, is just making the good feeling inside me well up. And it's like, wow, it's so empowering. And it just makes you feel so much more valued and so much more worthwhile. And so the I Am Enough cabaret this weekend, Sherry Garner, an Embro farm girl, grew up and then went across Canada as an actor and actually had the lead role at one point in the Sound of Music, an incredible singer, and actually struggled and didn't realize it with a mental health issue with rapid bipolar disease, up one day, down the next, and it just kept getting worse because she wasn't dealing with it. And it's her life story and her mental health struggles and the fact that she managed to get through it. And a very powerful story, unbelievably powerful. 3 shows, 3 standing ovations, just unbelievable.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. So this is your reminder. If during this week someone crosses your mind, maybe you see something that reminds you of them, maybe you just realize you haven't heard from them in a while, send that text. Set up a time to call, stop in, say hello, bring a coffee if it's to me. Thank you. And and have those chats. I think it's a really good point, Pete. When we think of people, let's reach out because frankly, we could all use an uplifting conversation in a day. Speaking of uplifting, we're going to switch gears a little bit and talk about fertilizer because, well, it is very uplifting. You were in Mount Forest just recently, did a discussion on the return on investment, the ROI of fertilizer. What say you? What were the questions like? How did it go?
Oh, it was just a ton of fun. And so this was largely a Mennonite group that I was able to speak to. So, I mean, just that in itself is a bunch of fun because they just have they bring different questions and different thought processes. And the person that organized the meeting said, "Hey, Pete, you do realize that for this demographic, their world is real agriculture." And that's kind of awesome because a lot of them call Wheat Pete's word, and that's just on the phone line, but that's excellent. It's Wheat Pete's word, or it's real agriculture. It's church, and then it's social time. It's their peers. And so that's the world. So it was really nice to be able to bring a thought process around fertilizers and lots of discussion about sulfur. Lyndsey, you and I have talked about this a ton, but I mean, if you're going down the sulfur on soybeans road, we've learned from the work that Sean Conley did that sulfur has to be applied early. And so make sure that you get it on by planting, because it's all about the nodulation. With wheat, we've also learned that it needs to be early. With corn, it doesn't need to be early at all. And so one of the questions that came up was, well, what about my edible beans? I'm going to plant my edible beans the 25th of May. Do I need sulfur? And of course, if you go through the thought process, no, because by the 25th of May, the sulfur's coming out of the organic matter. Right. It's not an issue. And then there was great discussion about broadcast fertilizer versus banded fertilizer. And the data is pretty clear. If you're going to broadcast, you need 4 times the amount of phosphorus to get the maximum amount of benefit you can out of the broadcast, to get close to 1/4 the rate banded. But you still, even with 4 times, you generally don't quite make the same response you get with 1/4 of the rate banded. And then we talked about fall broadcast. If you fall broadcast phosphorus, you need twice the rate in the fall that you would broadcast in the spring of that phosphorus to get the same response. And that's just because over the winter, that broadcast phosphorus ties up with the soil, with the calcium, with the aluminum, with the iron. And so it's there longer. It has more time to become unavailable in that soil bank account. So there's lots of stuff about that. We talked about nitrogen rates. It was a bunch of fun, and they had great questions, and I hope they invite me back again next year.
So you had a grower that asked about putting anhydrous ammonia on in the spring. Do you need to stabilize it? How do you answer that question?
And so, Lyndsey, again, you go through the thought process. If you're putting it on in the fall, you have to stabilize it because it's got such a long period over winter where it's subject to anything that can happen. So you stabilize it so you have less risk of loss. In the spring, it's a totally different story. So as long as you are getting it sealed in the soil, so I mean, if you don't seal it in the soil, anhydrous gas is off. That's an immediate loss. But you have to make sure you seal it. If you're sealing it, the anhydrous itself, just by its nature, tends to sterilize the area where it has been injected. And so if it sterilizes that area, that means it slows the conversion from ammonia to ammonium and therefore to nitrate. And so the risk of loss goes down. Plus, I'm buried 6 inches in the soil, give or take, or whatever depth, but at least I'm sealed in the soil. If I'm sealed in the soil and I change to nitrate, the chances of losing that from denitrification and gassing off, it doesn't go to 0, but it gets really, really small. So if you're able to apply anhydrous in the spring, the chances of gaining benefit from stabilizing that anhydrous is really quite slim. So I think spring applied anhydrous, if you can do it, I just don't see the need to stabilize that product at that time of year. Fall, totally different. You have to stabilize. Spring, not so much.
Great question from a grower again out west on expected survival rates, because, and I'm so glad that farmers are thinking through this, because we've talked about this many times on when you're trying to actually determine the best seeding rate. You need to know how many of the seeds you put in the ground, not just will they germinate, but will they survive? And that's a very different question, because of course, how you put those seeds in the ground may impact their survivability, the seeding conditions, yes, the germ, what's the pest pressure. there's all sorts of things that go into the actual expected survival rate. So what advice can you give growers when trying to determine, seeding rates, thinking about how many seeds actually make it to survival?
Yeah, and so Brett from Manitoba asked that great question, and he said, "What's the right seeding rate, and how do I determine my what my expected survival rate is?" And the expected survival rate, you can look on the tag on the bag, and it will say 97% germination or 89% germination, and you can do the math to say, okay, I want 1.6 million seeds per acre. I should therefore, based on germination, you can come up with the pounds per acre you seed and calibrate and do all those things. Well, man, if you get 40% survival, and I have seen situations, Lyndsey, where it is 40% survival, that you don't have enough plants. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, if you get, basically it says 97% germ and you get 95% establishment, Bob's your uncle. So you really, there's a few things you can do, Lyndsey. First off, you can say, what is the year like? Because if I'm planting into a well-prepared seed bed, the nice crumb structure, and it's got good moisture, it's ideal conditions, chances are survival will be very high. If it's a different spring, it's cloddy, it's lumpy, but it's just, it's raining too much, you just have to go, then, I think you have to say, okay, my survival rate is going to be lower. And by the way, in those less ideal conditions, you need more plants because they aren't going to tiller as well. They aren't going to grow as well. And so you actually want more plants when you're going to get less plants. But the other thing you have to do, and I can't tell you what's going to happen all the time. It's just not possible. So you have to say, okay, I'm going to assume this year I got 97% germ on my tag. I'm going to say I'm going to get 90% establishment. I'm going to figure my seeding rate out. For goodness sakes, after you do that, you know what the conditions were. You know what happened after. You have to get into the field and actually count the number of plants that made it, because that's where we slip the clutch. Growers, you drive past, it's a good enough stand. You don't know what that expected survival rate is. And if you do that for a few years, you can get much better.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's a really key point, right? Is recognize that no season is the same. So try and adjust, but then exactly that, give yourself a bit of a grade. Go out there and count how well you did as far as setting up the planter or the seeder, getting the stand counts. And it is true. I think the canola number, that even, industry average is something like 60% survivability. Like, that's not great, everybody. And for all sorts of reasons, right? And sometimes it could be your fan speed was up too high on the air seeder and you broke a whole bunch of seeds. It can happen, right? So go out there and check.
Yeah. And I mean, on corn, but very low seeding rate, right? 30,000 right. Or 32 and almost all perfect because you don't have seeds right beside each other. So if one gets a disease, it doesn't spread it to the next. Whereas the higher the seeding rate goes, the lower your percent stand is going to be.
Mm-hmm. All right. Okay, Pete, we got to leave it there. Quick shout out to everybody listening. The RealAg team is getting together this week in person in Toronto. And so we will, of course, still have the show all week, but there is no agronomist tonight, this Monday night, because we're going to a Jays game, and I'm excited. Mostly for a gigantic hot dog, because they're delicious. So looking forward to it.
The most expensive hot dog you'll ever eat.
That's correct. Better be good. Well, it does taste better in the actual, I'll call it the Rogers Center, but it's not. Anyway, there you go. The Sky Dome. Is it the Sky Dome? No, it's not the Sky Dome. Anyway, we'll be there. If anybody's at the game, say hi. We'll be the rowdy bunch. No idea where our seats are, but that's okay. All right, Pete, thank you so much for joining me here on the show today. I do appreciate it. And we'll see you later.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it. We'll see you at the game, Lyndsey.
All right. We'll be back with more RealAg Radio right after this. Well, that does it for another edition of RealAg Radio. Thank you so much for making us a part of your day. It is Good Friday on Friday, so we will be taking the day off. We'll have a replay that day, but of course we'll be here all week, 4:30 Eastern, right here on Rural Radio, Channel 147, Sirius XM. Thank you so much. We'll talk to you again. Cheers, everybody.
Thank you for downloading this RealAg Radio episode brought to you by Coragen Max Insecticide from FMC. When you need to protect your crops from damaging insects, Coragen Max Insecticide delivers fast, selective, extended control of grasshoppers, Bertha armyworms, diamondback moth, cutworms, and more. Ask your retailer or visit ag.fmc.com/ca today.